In the final, desperate days of World War II, a truly terrifying new weapon emerged from the ocean depths. It was this bizarre, horrifying fusion of man and machine, and it was designed for a mission with absolutely no return trip. This is the incredible story of the Kaiten, Japan's human torpedo.
They gave it this really poetic name, the Heaven Shaker, meant to sound like some divine power that could actually turn the tide of the war. But for the man sealed inside that steel tube, the reality was brutally simple. It was a one-way trip.
So how on earth did we get here? How did the Imperial Japanese Navy come to create a weapon like this? Well, it all starts with the grim, sinking realization that the war was being lost.
Okay, so what was it exactly? The Kaiten, which literally means turning to heaven, was exactly what it sounds like. It was a crude suicide torpedo, a last-ditch effort designed to guarantee a direct hit on an enemy ship. And what's really fascinating here is the complete 180 in their thinking. In late 1943, when these suicide craft were first suggested, the High Command actually rejected the idea. They called it defeatist. But just a few months later, the war was going so badly that these same weapons were suddenly considered essential, and boom, the first order for 100 of them goes out.
And you gotta understand, the Kaiten wasn't some rogue idea. Not at all. It was just one piece of a much bigger, desperate strategy of what they called special attack units. You had the famous kamikaze planes, of course, but also things like piloted bombs, suicide boats, and even suicide divers. The Kaiten was simply the underwater part of this whole terrifying national effort.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. How do you actually build one of these things? How do you cram a human being into a torpedo?
Well, the first version, the Type 1, and this is actually the only model that ever saw combat, it was almost brutally simple in its design. The engineers basically took Japan's most powerful torpedo, the Type 93, and just wedged a tiny cockpit for a pilot right in the middle.
And these two pictures, side by side, they just tell the whole story. On the left, you see that simple Type 1, basically a modified torpedo, but on the right, that's the Type 2 prototype. It was way more complex, a brand new machine built from scratch. But honestly, it was a total failure, plagued with so many technical problems that they had to scrap the whole thing. And this is a really chilling detail. The very first designs actually included a way for the pilot to escape, right before impact. But that idea was quickly thrown out. In the final version, once someone sealed the hatch from the outside, that was it. There was absolutely no way for the pilot to get out. So that brings us to the obvious and maybe the hardest question. Who were the men who signed up for this? Who were the pilots willing to go on these one-way missions?
They were just so young, unbelievably young. All the pilots were volunteers, and they were aged between 17 and 28. Some of them were barely more than boys. And the training they went through, it was just as brutal as you'd expect. They had to start by learning to steer fast boats using nothing but a periscope. Then they'd move into training versions of the Kaiten, practicing dangerous maneuvers, and finally doing attack runs, all leading up to one final terrifying test, a live launch from a real submarine. Just think about that. The training itself was so dangerous that 15 men died before they ever even saw a real enemy. Most of them died by accidentally ramming their training torpedoes into the target ships at full speed.
But here's the thing. Even if you were skilled enough and lucky enough to survive the training, the Kaiten itself was an absolute death trap, riddled with design flaws that made the missions even more dangerous than they were already meant to be.
So how did they get these things into enemy waters? Well, they were literally strapped to the decks of submarines, and right away you can probably see the huge problem this created for the submarine itself.
I mean, the list of problems with this thing was just staggering. Water was always leaking into the cockpit, which could make the engine explode, but the biggest flaw, the fatal one, was tactical. The Kaiten couldn't dive very deep, which meant the giant submarine carrying it also had to stay near the surface, making it a huge, slow, and very easy target.
All right, so let's get to the bottom line. After all this cost, all the resources, the machinery, and especially the human lives, what did it all amount to? Did the Heaven Shaker actually, shake the heavens?
This chart says it all, really. The results are, well, they're just devastatingly bad. Kaiten attacks are officially credited with sinking only 2 enemy ships, and to achieve that, Japan lost 8 of its own highly valuable submarines. That's a catastrophic 4-to-1 loss ratio against themselves. But, and this is important, on the rare occasion an attack did work, the results were absolutely catastrophic for the enemy. This is the fleet oiler USS Mississinewa.
It was hit by a Kaiten, and as you can see, it was completely destroyed. It just goes to show you the weapon's potential, but it also makes its overall failure even more tragic.
And that brings us to the final tragic tally, the human cost. You have over 100 Kaiten pilots lost in combat, plus the 15 who died just in training. But then there's the part of the story we often forget, the hundreds of regular sailors on those mother submarines. When a sub like the I-48 went down, it took all 122 crewmen with it.
So in the end, you have this weapon, the Kaiten, born from this belief that you could somehow bend fate, that you could turn the heavens. But when you look at the cold, hard facts, it really just leaves you with one question, doesn't it? Was this a tragic weapon of desperation, or was it all just a desperate waste?